And the first order of business is, um, do we need to do the affirmation at the beginning, Lucas, of this meeting since we didn't do it at the previous meeting?
Are you referring to the affirmation that we are going to be doing
Virtual, yes.
the virtual meeting? I think Bart will talk about that actually, but I mean, we can mention that as of this meeting, we now are allowed to do virtual meetings. And Bart's going to go through the, what is it, SB or AB 361 and talk about the affirmation that we have to do each month.
Okay. Okay. So with that, oral communications, are there people here that would like to speak, or are we going to totally go off the Google form?
Well, this is the first time that we're using this format where the Google form goes live for the first, I believe it's advertised 15 minutes of the meeting. So it is now available for people to enter comments into. As of right now, for the public, there are none.
Okay. Okay. So my understanding is, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bart, Lewis, and Lucas, if at any time during the meeting somebody does come on to the Google form, we'll get a notification and we kind of allow that to happen. Is that correct? Even though it's past the 15 minutes?
That would be up to our committee, but currently we're supposed to offer a time,
Okay.
set aside a time that's reasonable to receive public comments. And so by announcing the first 15 minutes, I consider that a reasonable amount.
Okay. That's great.
So I think we could probably continue forward and just keep an eye on our comments.
Okay.
There's a couple raised hands though.
Yeah, a couple people. Margaret, or I'm sorry, Margaret. Anne, your hand, you raised your hand.
It's okay, Thomas. Could the chair please clarify whether comments that are placed in the chat are captured for the public?
My understanding is yes or no, they're not posted.
So the chat is currently used for this group, but we're not streaming the chat. So we're not actually providing any public comment access to the chat.
Oh, okay.
So it shouldn't be considered a public comment. It can be used to facilitate the meeting, but it is not an open forum for our public.
Oh, okay. But
yeah, for example, that's
week
why I put that there were raised hands in the chat so that you guys would see it.
So did we not last week though? We posted everybody online that had typed into the Google form.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay. So it's not like a chat, but it's still, we would still post everything that was put into the Google form. Okay. Allison?
Yeah, I just had a sort of a question on behalf of FUDTA that and I admit that I was absent from the last meeting, but Stephanie Chan was out on leave for an extended time, and it would be nice to have an appropriate amount of teacher representation on a committee that makes ed tech decisions. And so I just wonder whether there was any possibility of, I know that we still have quorum without her, and that's in the minutes, but she is a teacher representative, and she represented elementary school teachers very well, which I don't feel qualified to do. And so I wondered if there might be an opportunity to have an interim person fill in for Stephanie.
We talked about it last meeting, and I guess we could get official, but on a basic level, we wanted to respect her rights and her privacy rights. She did not resign from the committee. So currently we don't have bylaws that say if you miss 4 meetings, and even then if she did meeting, since she's on leave, I don't know if that would come into effect either. So we were in this gray area of, she has rights as being on leave. and Allison, I totally concur about the representation, but I don't want to abridge her since she did not officially resign. She still has a place, and it didn't affect quorum in the sense of numerics. It was still 9 either way. I guess we could look for full legal clarification.
I would appreciate that. I know she reached out to me and she wanted to make sure that the voice of teachers was not diminished by the fact that she has to take an extended absence. And
Right.
And so I just think that's very important. Again, given that we're making decisions about educational technology for the classroom, and she was a very important voice, and it would be really nice, even if it was only on a substitute basis, to have another elementary educator be able to weigh in on some of these issues.
Okay, so we will have a resolution of that as soon as possible and notify. Linda?
So I do think that it is in the bylaws that you are obligated to make a certain percentage of meetings. I believe that is in the bylaws. Robert, I think you can clarify that for me, because we had this issue and are still having this issue with Alok being a member, but not being here and not communicating that he's not going to be here.
Yeah, I know
That did
there's
come up last year.
Right, and I know that aspect of it. What we don't know is how that's affected by leave. That's what we need to find out.
Okay.
Because of the leave aspect of it. If I'm choosing not to come, obviously I'm not participating. That's where that bylaw we know comes into effect. This is a little bit different, but I will find out and let everybody know.
Am I the only one hearing that
It sounds like it's coming.
Nope, I hear it too.
It's coming from Robert who?
Yeah. Okay.
And he's muted, yeah.
Okay, so nothing in the, so we, approval of last meeting's minutes. And then if during this 15 minutes, somebody comes on, we'll, after the 15 minutes, we would close. Comments. Is everybody?
I'm still getting a lot of noise.
Robert,
are you
if
still
you hear
getting
us,
it?
we think it's your connection. Maybe you want to drop off and try to connect again.
Is it? So that's what I'm asking.
Yeah,
Is it just me?
Yeah, no, I think I'm hearing stuff too. If we could all just go to mute, and Tom would be the only one that's speaking right now.
It looks like everyone is muted, but there's still noise.
I don't hear anything.
Yeah, I think Don and I are both. Don, are you hearing it's like wind?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I hear it
all
too.
hearing it. Tom, can you try muting? It might be you if you're the only one that doesn't hear it.
Say that again.
I was just gonna say you might try muting yours and see if it's you if you're the only one that doesn't hear it, because we all do. Never mind, it was a good thought. we might just have to deal with sounding like we're meeting at the seashore.
So moving along, I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Yeah, okay. Everybody had a chance to look at the minutes for approval?
I'd like to make one comment before we entertain the motion. I had written down that the quorum was out of 16 members because at the time I assumed that with Stephanie's leave, she didn't count towards quorum, but I can change that back to 17 as the denominator.
That's good.
I can second Ann's motion.
Okay. Any discussion? Nope. All in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? And that would be anybody that was not at last meeting. I know Allison and Michelle. Motion passes. We do not have any old business. And then moving on, I'll just give you a brief paraphrase. Obviously, we've gone to a virtual format again. And Bart is going to make a presentation that reflects our requirements as a committee that's subject to the Brown Act, and then also with the guidance from the last board meeting on how they wanted us as not just our committee, but all district committees to operate on. So without any further ado, I will turn it over to Bart.
Are you guys seeing my screen?
No.
Tom, can you approve my presentation?
You're muted, Tom.
No? There we go. Okay, so as of last Friday, October 1st, we received permission to have virtual meetings, and that's the AB 361 we've been talking about. The main piece there is that our state has to be under a governor emergency. So right now it's still active from the beginning of the pandemic. And so if that changes, we cannot meet virtually. So that's one of the big triggers. So I think we will keep an eye on that a week or so before each meeting to make sure that we're in compliance with that. So that's one piece of the, you kind of just Google, California and state of emergency, and you'll see that. The other one that's important is we have to reaffirm that we want to do a virtual meeting every 30 days. So we want to include an agenda item in each of our current meetings saying that we want to meet again virtually. And then it primarily just makes the flexibility of having these virtual meetings. So if we're concerned about our members' safety, health, we're continuing to meet virtually. And I think we had some good conversations this summer about how we had good quorum and other aspects. So I think it works out that the will of our committee was already kind of proven that we wanted to continue to meet virtually. So we've started that back up again. The board had a first round of conversations around this, committees in general. And the big piece is we want to continue following the Brown Act in a transparent and access-based way. And so what this does is it requests that we have access or transparency by being streamed. So each of our meetings do have to be streamed when we're virtual, and access by providing a live set of comments. And that's what our Google form is. So if I go check our Google form, we can see that we haven't received any comments for this 15-minute window. So I think we can now close our comment window, so we can see here that. And the other piece I wanted to say is we're going to be promoting a one-pager on the website about all of our committees. And so this is a draft of it, but it also talks about AB 361 and how we're able to virtually meet right now. So the next part of this, we can have a discussion on this, but the next part of it would be a motion to continue virtually and then voting on that. And I'll stop sharing.
Any questions for Bart?
Yeah, I have a quick question. I'm sorry, Bart. I had logged off and logged back on right when you were
Okay.
talking about is it the emergency pandemic thing that keeps us being able to be virtual?
Yes. So
And it's
currently
at the state level?
it has to be, declared by the governor. So it can't be just Fremont or Alameda County. It has to actually be statewide.
Okay.
And possibly this, depending on our agenda items and moving forward, it may be something that we want to look at to continue with, but that would be moving away from the Brown Act. So that would be a whole nother kind of range of changes to our committee. But initially, this SB 361 goes through January of 2024. So we have a run, a good run of this, as long as we stay under an emergency condition and we maintain our streaming and public access through our live collection of feedback or public comment.
Manjeet, your hand was up.
Yes, that question is answered. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I did have one question, Bart. More of a logistic than any. Yeah, that's Robert making a point. If I'll have to look at the calendar, but based on some of the way that our calendar falls, what would happen if we were at 34 days between meetings?
So we have that question out to the administration, Patty, and committee leads. So we'll get back to that. I think worst case, or not worst case, but if there is a compliance issue with that time frame, we may have to call a special meeting, a quick special meeting virtually, and affirm that we wanted that and have that only as our agenda item, and then drop off and properly message that on the site and those pieces there. So
okay. So just as a note, I would, if we approve this, lost my pencil here. I would go through the calendar and then pre-schedule those if necessary, so we would all know when we would have to meet for a single item agenda, single agenda item.
special meeting. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. Typically in site councils, at least which I have been part of, you're allowed to just send affirmation by email. Is that not allowed for this committee? For business that you missed or couldn't cover?
I don't think it would be, because a special meeting is only different because it has to have an agenda that can be published 24 hours before. So we still have to make sure we properly message and provide access to the public when we make a decision in this committee. So even though it might be just 10-minute meeting, we would still have to come to a quorum, announce our intentions, open up public feedback, and then vote on it publicly.
Any other questions? Okay, entertain a motion to move forward that we would put this on our agenda and affirm our next month's. So I'm looking for a motion.
I move to start each meeting approving the virtual meetings.
It's actually, you're actually announcing that you're going to be virtual the next meeting.
Yes, that's exactly what I moved.
And I'll second that.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, any conversation? No, all in favor? Any opposed? Abstentions? You don't get the most slides, Ms. Nagaro.
I was gonna
Allison,
yes,
could
I was like, oh.
Allison, could you
Elliot?
clarify, your hand was up for a long time. Was it for the positive or the?
Yeah, I had raised my hand in person and then I raised it virtually, but it was towards the end of the time when Tom called the next one. I am in favor of this, not abstention or against.
Okay. Okay, so the next topic is on the agenda is, thank you, Bart, for your presentation. How do we decide agenda items? Historically, it's come to, I'll give a brief, Robert's been here longer than I, but historically, it's come through a variety of avenues. And it's been predominantly from the majority has come from the CTO. for whatever reason, whether the board directed the CTO or the CTO perceived a need in the district, and the CTO, in a sense, was a funnel. If there were a lot of teachers, needed some, particular program or whatever, they were letting know technology. Or, like there was a need for a district-wide grade program, and at that time, so then it came to the TAC about School Loop, and then it was there. That's been in my tenure, and I haven't kept track, so anecdotally has been the majority of the agenda items that we have dealt with. Occasionally, an item has come up to the board before, and the board has asked, what does TAC think of this item? And it had never come before TAC, so then it came to TAC, in a sense, directly to TAC, usually via the CTO, and then we go. The last area has been occasionally a community member or a staff member would, at a previous meeting, ask a question during public comments, and then we would then, as a group, add it to the agenda. But it's been entirely, I don't want to say informal, because when the board directs us to do something, we do it. We serve the board. Ultimately, that's our mission. So the question is, how do, if there's we know that we have limited time, how do we put things on the agenda? Allison?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, when I was chair, one of the things that I did was sending out a message quite a bit in advance of the meeting and asking if anybody had any items to put on the agenda. So that could be something that we could potentially continue doing. And all of us represent different groups. And so if there was a notification in advance of the meeting that, like, hey, what do you guys want on the agenda? Then we could theoretically ask the groups that we represent.
Anuraba?
Arun, it's Arun. Hello.
Hello?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Can you? Yes, I have a few thoughts on this. So there's a couple of angles. So one is, I definitely like the board to actually provide more input, because they definitely hear a lot from people all over. It's just not clear to me how much they hear in terms of technology. So that's the one thing I'm not sure of. The second thing is where you source these ideas. And for me, I do plan to source it from my high schools and my my elementary schools, whatever site councils, PTAs that I'm part of. And then there's a third item about how do we rank these ideas, where just what should be discussed and where it should be in the pecking order. I don't know if you want to do anything formal, but if there's an idea, I would propose for the solution to be presented. Why do you think it's a great idea? Who wants it? And then we can basically, in advance, I don't know if you're allowed to do this, but in advance of the meeting, just vote on the 10 things that are there and just put them in rank choice on where you want to put them in the agenda. You may not get to the lowest ranked item, but we have something there. Now, I don't know in the past if it's been we have fewer ideas or we have too many ideas, but that was one of my thoughts. And I was curious, can this whole thing be organized as a Google Classroom, like the whole TAC committee? Because that lets you, do these polls and all that and keep a record of everything. Or is there more regulation around it?
Yeah, you can't do that.
No? Because of
You're on
regulation?
mute. I'm going to jump in. One of the issues
Go
there
ahead,
is
yeah,
called
please.
serial meetings, and we're not allowed to have a serial meeting, which the issue is if we are on a virtual platform of some sort, and then everybody is seeing that and coming to a consensus and or raising it or voting it, we actually end up having a meeting inadvertently, and then we break Brown Act requirements. So it's not we can't collaborate so fully. We can have single direction communications. We're going to talk about this next time. or this is when the meeting is, those pieces, but we can't actually do a full circle with a quorum of folks. But we might, one tool that we do have is subcommittees, which we can meet in smaller groups, more flexible. And as long as we don't have a quorum or up to 9, then we could have kind of a group, a working group that doesn't have to follow such tight procedures.
So that comment was with regard to voting on any, how popular an agenda item is.
That was actually towards the Google Classroom first.
Okay.
And then potentially we can have a tool that, like, the president could capture, a vote, maybe. I don't know. We could look into that. I think it seems like there should be a tool that, as long as we're not all knowing the information at the same time and it doesn't turn into a meeting, we could potentially build an agenda item. I'm not sure though.
Okay.
Lucas?
Yeah, I just wanted to reaffirm what Bart said about subcommittees. Typically or traditionally, we've used subcommittees to work on specific projects. For example, the student use of technology policy. But if there is a specific topic that the committee really wants to work on and spend more time discussing, a subcommittee, I imagine, could accomplish that goal, and then they could do a report out to the committee as a whole. But I'd want to make sure in that case that there was some type of goal in mind for that subcommittee, and that it's always important that the members on those subcommittees are active participants. Sometimes in the past that hasn't always been the case. The other thing I was going to mention, Tom, is just that if there's a specific item of importance that the superintendent might bring to me or that I see, those are also the types of items that would be put on the agenda. But I think Tom explained it pretty well. Really, we don't have a history of saying, no, we're not going to talk about a topic. And if during a meeting, at the end, we talk about future topics. If there's a handful of people that want to talk about a particular agenda item in the future, we'll make a note of it. And then at the next meeting, we'll see if it makes sense to be part of that agenda. Obviously, the more interest there is, the more likely it will be to get on the next agenda. But we're absolutely right. We can't talk about that offline. There's conflicts of interest with that. So that's what I wanted to share.
Dawn?
Yeah, I was just going to mention that I feel like historically it's happened somewhat organically in that, the things that people have already said. And then in terms of prioritizing, that seems to happen somewhat naturally as well without the need to really vote and prioritize, because, a lot of times it's either something that's urgent that needs to be done right away or a decision that needs to be made. So I think what we're going to see is that I don't think we need to add anything new. I think that for people who are new to the committee, I think you'll see that it just kind of organically happens depending on what's coming from the outside, that like Lucas and Tom already mentioned, and then what gets discussed in the meeting. And then we just sort of naturally say, okay, let's maybe make that an agenda item. And then they work out. And then you've already seen, like last month, we had to postpone 2 items that weren't time sensitive. So I just think that should probably keep working without needing, polls or surveys or all the extra stuff.
Allison?
Yeah, just sort of a counterpoint to that. This committee works really well in its current iteration, but I spent a few years in frustration as a teacher trying to raise certain technology issues and being turned down and ignored, before I was actually on the committee. And so I think the positive side of having a procedure is that everybody knows what they need to do to get something on the agenda. And if you are not, in normal conversation with me as the FUDTA rep or whatever, that you know that there is still a process for that, and that something could potentially be put on the agenda. It's very transparent and open and helpful. I think if people are thinking, the frustrating thing about open communications is that we don't get to respond to those. So having something agendized is the only way to get any kind of answer to your question. And so that would be the reason that I would advocate for a more formal procedure.
Yeah, and maybe I could give the reason I put it on the agenda was, and those of us been here for a long time. So when I hired 17 years ago, I literally didn't even have a computer in my classroom. I mean, it just wasn't standard equipment. So the technology of the district 17 years ago was fairly limited. And Robert will tell you, up at Mission, they literally were stringing, I don't know, probably wasn't Cat 5 at that time, but whatever, they were literally, ramming it through the walls into the classroom to put in internet. The needs now of technology are overwhelming for the district, and the expectations of technology are not linearly increased, but geometrically increased. So I think that my thought was, when I was thinking about this, is increasingly TAC, will be a more time demanding agenda. As Allison said, teachers, because so much more of their job is related to technology, are going to be taking an increase in. And I've seen it only as I've seen new teachers bringing new technology with them and their needs and their, why doesn't this happen, or why does that happen, or whatever. So I think there's going to be a time where, I won't be here, but I don't want to be like the school board meeting till 2 a.m. in the morning with agenda items that, people, and they rightly so. So I do think we need, even if it's not accessed for a year or two, a process, in the sense that, if only one person puts it through the process, that person, they've gotten on the agenda, and as Allison says, they feel that their concern or has been addressed, may not come to their liking, but they know that their voice was heard and responded to. Public comments, we don't respond, right? That we take it in. So I don't necessarily think that tonight we need to come up with a process, but my thought would be, as we roll it into the old business and people think about, and I would suggest a subcommittee, but I'm hesitant to do that because subcommittees have notoriously been not that effective. But what I would like to do is people to think about how they feel the group that they represent, whether it's, Don represents CNI, Eli represents, Prince, and Allison FUDTA, parents representing parents, that each group, how do you feel that your group could best feel like they have access to TAC's agenda? Does that make sense? So I think that I'm really just starting the conversation. And if you have the opportunity to talk to the people that you work with, and then next meeting, we could have another short conversation. And maybe at that time, we do then, put together a subcommittee to bring these ideas together. But at least take a month to really think about what we've talked about. Vivek, you had a question or a comment?
Yeah, just one suggestion to consider here. I mean, if you look at how the board agenda is created, I mean, there's a calendaring that happens in the prior board meetings, and also there are public suggestions that come as topics that they want to discuss, and then the superintendent and the president of the board get together 1 week before. They create a tentative agenda that is then circulated to the members, right? And the agenda is formulated. So I'm thinking if there are pressing topics that show up, that you and Lucas can get together and see if that should be added to the upcoming meeting agenda and circulated to the team to get the buy-in. something to consider here as well. That way we don't wait 2 months to get something on the agenda.
Robert?
Actually, traditionally in the past, we have done what Vivek has suggested. Typically or commonly, the agenda is sent out a week ahead of time, and the chair can ask for input at that time, and people can offer things for the agenda. In the past, we have not had 20 different agenda items and get overwhelmed. If we do, then our process sounds really nice. I would caution not to model, well, not that I'm against the board, but we don't have to follow all the regulations of the board. And, we try and stay, as a small committee. Most committees do not run like the board. The Brown Act is forced upon us by the board, but we're not legally required to follow it. That kind of stuff. So I think we can adjust as we need to. I know that Allison's had some issues. But I'm hoping that everyone, in the community has a representative on the everyone in the community has a representative on the committee. So if you're a teacher and you're finding that we're not talking, then talk to a teacher rep and make sure that your voice is heard. I think it is hard for someone outside to understand TAC and how to get involved. And I would say one other thing: we only meet once a month for an hour and a half to 2 hours. We're not designed to solve every technology problem. Lucas has a great team. A lot of the stuff should be going through Lucas. If it comes to us, it's going to take a couple months to figure out. So, we don't look at everything.
Let's see here. Lucas.
Yeah, I actually want to reiterate that the process does actually look fairly similar to what the school board does. It's just on a smaller scale. This particular meeting, we didn't meet a week in advance, but there was a pretty small gap between our last meeting and this one. But that is traditionally what I've done when I worked with Allison, who was the chair, with Linda, and now with Tom. We typically will meet a week in advance, and the goal is to get a proposed agenda out so that even at that point, if there were members on the committee that wanted to add agenda items, they could propose those and we would evaluate to see if it fits. The school board does that exact same thing. There are definitely months where or weeks where there's just way too many agenda items and they have to push agenda items to the next meeting. So we actually do follow a very similar model currently to the school board.
Art?
Just to add to Robert's openness and access for the public, we are now promoting the FUSD web as an email. So when any feedback, anybody who's watching, any public members, you can send that through to that email and it will be routed to potentially your constituent on the group and or brought up right with the chair and Lucas as well. So even though our Google form turns on and off for live pieces, we are constantly keeping an eye on the FUSD web email.
Bart, did you see that chat for Allison?
Yeah, sorry, just to repeat, can we clarify to the public what that address is?
It's right there on our top of our website. It's FUSDweb at FUSDK12.net. So that's the generic email for the district. It's manned by moi, and I route any number of contacts a day to different departments and different pieces. So if the community uses the 3-letter TAC, that will give me a heads up in the subject line, and I will know to bring it to our group.
That's good to know, because I think a lot of people think that that's just for like website problems. So,
and I'll be clear, that's what I thought it was, just for tech.
I did too. Like if I see something that's inaccurate on the website, yeah. Thank you.
Okay. That's okay. So unless anybody objects, I don't want to formalize anything. I just have to have one more conversation. One of the things that I struggle with, not just here, but in all of the organizations that I've ever worked with, is that people do not understand how to access or feel like they've been listened to. And I think that's an important part of any organization or leadership team. And while we're not leadership, we're representative. That we have parent representatives, we have CSEA, we have CSSEIU. All of us represent some constituent group. And, when I've been on here, like I said, now I think this is my 14th year. Very few people know that I am on TAC. It's, we've not provided that information. It's not through secretiveness or anything. So I think that we need to have some type of that people can click on and say, maybe it is just a link, that you go on to TAC and you click on it and say, hey, it takes you to the Google form, or it takes you to the list of your constituents, your representatives, and then you can contact them. So I would just like this for all to have in the back of the mind, and then we can revisit this in the next meeting if there is, like I said, as everybody said, it's worked very well in the past. I've had some frustrations, and it has to do with the amount of time and how do we prioritize the things of importance. So unless anybody has any other comments. Nope. Okay, the next item is live video classroom streaming requirements. This was brought to us via
Tom, just to make sure, I'm showing that as agenda item 4. Was there any action to take place for School Loop website?
Oh,
updates?
I'm sorry, I missed School Loop. Oh, that's okay. That's because, so you're going to address that as a separate issue, Lucas?
This is actually specifically to talk about the experience we've been having with the School Loop website.
Oh, okay. So that is it. Okay.
And so,
Bart, Bart.
Yeah, Bart is going to share a little bit of an update. It's not, people can certainly ask questions, but it's really more of a quick update on what we're experiencing right now, because the website's been down during some pretty critical times during business hours, and of course, yeah, it's a significant impact.
It's no worse than Facebook being down 6 hours today.
And Escape has been down also, so.
So Bart, you're up.
All right. So just to give you guys an idea, anything over 45 minutes downtime over the last couple months, starting back in June, you can see that we've had some pretty big, there's a couple 3-hour gaps where we've lost all, the site is completely dead. It's just a 500 error failure. So we just wanted to bring this up to the group to say that we're concerned that this product is not strong enough for our needs. And I previously presented other options with a CMS with content management systems to the TAC, and I am currently building out another presentation around other providers. I'm not excited to migrate everything off of our website and go somewhere else, but I just wanted to make sure that we saw that it is clearly a pattern, and just wanted to bring that up. I think the first conversation might be open source, not open source, any security things that our group would want to talk about with working with web publishing, but I don't know how deep we want to take that today, but I just want to kind of give you guys a heads up on it is probably an issue that will become actionable pretty soon.
Allison.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that thank you for bringing that up. And that just from a teacher perspective, as a FUDTA rep, there are some users, and Bart's totally aware, they're not just teachers. There's a lot of CSEA folks who have a lot of information on these web pages. librarians are one of them, counselors. Like there are people who have tons and tons and tons of information on their school websites. And so anything that we would need to migrate to, we would need a significant amount of time for people to move significant amounts of information over to a new site and configure a new site. It doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. I'm just saying it needs to be not something that happens in the end of August.
Manjeet?
Yes, when I heard Bart say that we want to first decide whether it will be an open source or a paid non-open source application, I think my first question would here be, instead of looking at that, if we look at what are the compliance requirements, being a school district, that is more critical for us. We've got student data, we've got parents data, we've got teachers data in there. So I think compliance would be taking a bit priority before we decide which tool we want to go with. And if there are other standard tools which are used in the neighborhood school districts, and they have some experience with any of those, that might be at least a guiding factor. May not be a deciding factor, but at least a guiding factor for us to look at.
Thanks, Manjeet. I'll jump in. Luckily, our public-facing presentation does not tie into our student data. So we actually don't have a significant amount of compliance issues with that part of our online mix of products and things. So we are pretty open to having, so the open source answer I would suggest would be a WordPress site with proper management and security setups versus a K-12 solution. Probably the three top ones are Blackboard, Final Site, and Edlio. And so those are the kind of the four pieces of the puzzle that I'm getting bids and talking to some representatives about. So that's the kind of stuff I would bring to them. A number of districts are using a mix of those. On the open source side, all of Seattle's public schools recently moved to WordPress. So I know that it can be done, even though it sounds a bit off tool or whatever, but there's different cost savings and pieces around that. But luckily, compliance-wise, we don't store any student information on the website in a FERPA kind of land, federal regulation kind of land.
Eli?
Allison raises a good point with needing to honor the amount of time it's taken staff members to upload data to their existing websites. But I did want to offer the counterpoint that School Loop does have its limitations. And so some sites or front offices are currently not uploading or not reporting as much information as they would on another product that had a different interface, whether that's with greater Google Drive interface or HTML coding. Something that would allow for greater customization would be desired.
Yeah, and I think I think one important aspect as well is that we start letting our constituents know now that this is, I don't know what percentage likely, but it's very likely that we are going to have to. I don't look at the district website, a whole lot, but as an organization, you can't afford to be down for 3-hour things of time. And I think, Bart didn't really go into this, but it's increasingly a lack of support as well. He was telling me that he would call over there and nobody would be answering the phone to say, what is the estimated, time to come back up, why are you down? And he was getting no support at all. And I think that's a real problem as well, when you're not getting the support you need. If they're able to say, well, this is a one-time thing, we were doing some type of upgrade, something, but it seems like there's a lack of communication at this point as well. Lucas?
Yeah, I wanted to share a little bit of the background too. Bart and myself have spent a good amount of time on the phone with School Loop, talking to them about our concerns. So I did want to at least share that with the public and with the committee members. We've talked to them specifically about the things that they are doing to improve. And unfortunately, we have really not seen any improvements. The main issues from what we've been able to gather from them is that most of the incidents have involved denial of service attacks, which, you know, are not an uncommon thing, but there are things that companies can do to mitigate that. And the only piece of information we've received from School Loop is that they've upgraded their firewall. Well, that's a pretty not a very useful response, because just upgrading your firewall, well, what does that actually mean? When you really, if you're a company that's experiencing denial of service attacks, you need to have failover data centers for those sites. And clearly that's not happening with School Loop, so they're not investing. And there's, you know, when this company was purchased by one of those finance companies that was really in it to make money, there's been a significant change in the support levels that we've seen. And it's really apparent from the responses that we've received. And we've asked them to notify us when the system is down. And ultimately what's been happening is we've been notifying them and telling them that our site is down. So there's really been no notification system as well. So we're always scrambling and behind the 8 ball when this happens. So I just wanted you guys to hear that we have also tried to be very proactive with them and ask them to do some things to help mitigate this. I can tell you from my experience and also from Bart's experience that we also want to be very cautious about saying we're going to leave School Loop. It's a huge lift to switch websites. Obviously, a tremendous amount of content and work has gone into it, to Allison's point, to Bart's point, to Tom's point. So we really want to be cautious about just saying, well, we're going to leave because we're frustrated with downtime. So just know behind the scenes, we are continuing to push School Loop to make improvements, because the reality is if they were to suddenly turn around and start performing well, we would at least ask the question and say, well, maybe we've kind of been heading in this direction, but maybe it doesn't make sense anymore.
Anne?
I would just like to comment that from the classified staff perspective, and Bart probably gets this as well, when the website is down, it becomes a major customer service issue, particularly now when the only way for a parent to register for their child to be COVID tested is through the district website. It's a customer service issue. Thank you.
Yeah, and I put myself in the queue, but I guess I didn't raise my hand here. I think one of the things that teachers, you know, I particularly my site, because I talk, a lot of parents when we were using School Loop didn't necessarily go to our websites because they received a daily email, and if you have received that email, it looks like a website. You open it up and it has the communication from the office, from the district. It had everything there. So then they essentially were looking at the equivalent of website. Now that we no longer have that coming, there's more, and we have more customers going directly to the website now, and so that it becomes even more important that we're up, you know, on a consistent basis. Allison?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I'm getting weird echoes of our Infinite Campus discussions from last year. And one thing I learned from our transition to Infinite Campus this year is that even though we try to I think the plan was to tell the staff all the positives about Infinite Campus and not worry about sharing this sort of back end, you know, tech information with them. But what happened was that everybody had the impression that we went from a product that was working to one that isn't for no reason. And so what I've learned from that is that these kinds of things, if we could share data with the staff, like you know, we were down X number of times for X number of hours and there was no response. I do think that it would help us sort of explain to the staff why we might be leaving School Loop. And I would just sort of advise everybody in a position to do that, to kind of document these things and to actually share them with the staff, because people understand leaving a product that is falling apart, not maintained well, you know, all kinds of things for something else, even if the process is rocky. But that's not the way they perceived this transition to Infinite Campus. And I think we could ameliorate that maybe next time.
Ellie?
I know the answer from the particular site that I work at, but I don't know the measurement across the district. Do we have any idea how many certificated staff members or even like our library media technician classified workers use School Loop versus another product like Google Sites for hosting their websites? Is it more of a secondary concern versus a primary?
Bart, do you have the answer for that?
I don't have a perfect answer for that, but the last time I took a look at that, at the elementary level, teachers were about 20% on a usage of some tool, not specifically School Loop or not. And every site has a administrator of some sort, whether it's a volunteer or secretary or principal, that is in charge of the front page. And so there's, you know, at least 40 active users across the fronts. But I wouldn't have any tighter data at this point, although it would be good to see the use of sites versus School Loop, because sites and publishing a Google Doc is probably the two other tools that are most used.
Just anecdotally, Ellie, I just looked at Centerville where I work, and you can tell if they use the School Loop because it's highlighted, you know, it's bolded. It looks like 2/3 of our members or the staff have an active. Of course, I noticed they were all feverishly updating over the last few weeks because nobody ever looked at their website. So, but it looks about 2/3.
I just wanted to add, though, that your teachers are not necessarily the only users that you want to be looking at. That Google Classroom doesn't make any sense. I have a Google Classroom as a librarian, but kids have to join it. To me, like a public-facing website is what makes the most sense for me, right? So our library page is very active and highly used, and I maintain it all the time. And our career center technician, it's the same. Our counselors are the same. So I would just advocate for those special groups not to be overlooked when doing a transition, because it would take me the entire summer to migrate my things. That I do not complain about that. You don't even have to pay me. I get it. This is the way things work, but I need a warning to do that.
Clicked off here. Just to chime in for Allison, those special people like counselors, librarians, those websites are extremely active, and the students use them. The parent community, guardian community, they use those sites and I know particularly because I work with some of the counselors and some of the costs and things. So obviously those are the power site users versus teachers tend to be minimalists. Anne?
Sorry, I just want to remind members that are new to the community, to this TAC, that some of the things that Allison and Tom talk about with School Loop and the daily message going out and the parents being able to see the website, that did not apply in elementary. So we have, 28 elementaries. Ours did not work that way. So we're still reliant on other systems such as the Bright Arrow robocall or robo email, now the Infinite Campus Messenger, also Peach Jar. So when as we continue to potentially agendize this transition, statistics, that kind of thing, we potentially need to have an elementary discussion and a secondary discussion, very different. And as Allison mentioned, there are a lot of crossover employees that are classified employees, the library media technicians, not the library media teachers at the high schools, but the technicians at each school. So lots, I hear this being added to potential future agenda.
So it doesn't sound, obviously we're not making any kind of decisions today. I guess we'll just keep this as an old business item, Bart and Lucas, as you travail, and we'll get updates. And then at some point, if we need to make some recommendation or based on your recommendation, go from there. It sounds like we're still in the exploratory phase, but is that a correct statement there? Okay, great. Okay, Manjeet?
Yeah, regarding recommendation, is there a objective wish list for that tool that it should meet such and such things? Or if we as a TAC members go out and try to identify something, can we share with the group here?
I will work on posting a feature list. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, any other thoughts, comments, or questions regarding the website? And I think, Ann, just give a broad overview. You have the district website, which is the main Fremont Unified. Then each school site has a website, or Centerville or Olivera, whatever. And then all of the counselors, school librarian teachers, they have their sites, counselors, and then teachers. So it's a variety of levels and obviously different levels of usage. Okay, so moving on to the live video. Oh, Linda, go ahead.
Yeah, just real quick. So it's not just specific to school. Like the PTAs have websites that are attached there, booster clubs. So there's, it's just not necessarily the immediate school community that needs to be given a heads up, but other entities that interact with the school need to be given a heads up as well. I mean, not most of those are, like, I'm in charge of the one at the PTSA site at Washington, and I actually already moved it off of School Loop and went to Google Sites just because I didn't want to have to try and figure out School Loop. But just that, I mean, we just need to be cognizant that it's not just the immediate school and staff and librarians and all that. It's also booster clubs, drama, clubs that are with the school and stuff like that. So I just wanted to make that point.
Child Nutrition uses an outside site as well.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And with that, we move on to live video classroom streaming requirements. This was discussed briefly last year, and then Lucas brought it to the table prior to last meeting, that there's some people that are interested in looking at the requirements for this. This would purely be from a tech stand requirement, and I'm going to turn it over to Lucas, kind of give some broad overview, and then we can go from there.
All right, thanks, Tom. So I'm going to share just a little bit, and then I'm going to there's a couple folks on the committee who are particularly interested in, I think, some specific aspects of this topic, and I'm going to give an opportunity to talk about that. From a technical standpoint, the technologies to do streaming from the classroom exist for sure. And there's different ways that we could approach this. There's no question about it. I know some of the discussion around this has involved saying, if a teacher were to teach a class at one school and there was students at another school who would want to join that class, that's one model. And that's a relatively small scope in terms of doing streaming. And it'd be very narrow. The rooms that would be utilized would be very specific. Conceptually, the IT department has developed 3 potential standards. One, if a room that was like the size of a conference room was going to be used for students who are going to be participating remotely. Another model would be a small classroom, and then a regular sized classroom. Each of those scenarios, of course, the technology requirements might be different. And at one school, the classroom might need more equipment than another. So obviously each location would need to have an evaluation. If they already had speakers in the ceiling, for example, or they already had a microphone system, there would obviously not be a cost for that. The other variable would be maybe there's only 2 students. If you have a larger number of students, this scenario will be different. So I think from a technical perspective, I don't see that as a barrier. It's just that depending upon the scope of it and the scale of it, there may be additional support resources that are needed. But as soon as you talk about having like a hybrid scenario where classes are being taught from the classroom, but there are students maybe that are at home, then that opens up a whole new scenario. On a large scale, it might require increasing our resources, our internet connection, that kind of thing. If it's a small scale, we probably wouldn't need to do anything additional. So those are the kind of the high level variables that we've looked at, but the IT department definitely has no issue putting together a scope of work for 3 different scenarios. But the reality is, again, we would need to look at the specific spaces to know exactly what the cost would be and the work that would need to be done. And the more we scale it, the more support we would need, because this is not a situation where, we're trying to have a committee meeting. If things don't work for 15 minutes, it's not the end of the world. But if you have a classroom and students are waiting for 20 minutes to get on, you got to have someone who's there within a few minutes to assist. And so support is a real factor as we talk about this. And I'm going to leave it at that. So for those who want to comment or ask questions or have had some ideas about this, go ahead and share.
Allison has her hand up.
Yeah, just real quick from a teacher's perspective, the problems with hybrid learning are many. We saw that last year when a lot of districts tried it in the spring. There's been a lot of comparison, I think, especially in parent groups between the board meeting and classrooms. And they're like, hey, if the board meeting can have hybrid continuous streaming, why can't we do that in our classrooms? And I know it's hard to understand that if you're not a teacher or a current student, but I just sort of wanted to explain from a teacher's perspective, we no longer stand and lecture in front of a podium in front of the room. A modern classroom doesn't look like that. A modern classroom involves a lot of grouping of students and teachers moving around the room and students speaking and students coming up to the board to demonstrate things and things that are happening not in front of the room. And a lot of really complex stuff. It's not just like, even when I've spoken to some of our parents who want this option, they're like, oh, even if it wasn't a full class, what if you lecture for 20 minutes and we record you and it's streaming and then you can go do practice with your students? It doesn't even really look like that. Like our modern lessons involve a lot more dynamic sort of grouping and speaking and things like that happening. In such a way that the student who was trying to live stream from home would miss things. And so I think teachers are concerned that if we have to do this, it's going to involve me anchored to my desk in the front of the room where I don't normally ever stay, talking to a laptop, ignoring 34 students so that I can help the one who's at home. And that's what a lot of my colleagues lived through. I have a friend who teaches in North Carolina, and that's what she had to do last year. She had 15 students in front of her and 20 students at home. And that's the way that she had to teach. And it was an inferior learning experience for all students. So I just kind of wanted people to be aware that we don't, when you're thinking about technology, we don't stay in one place. The microphones on those laptops are not great. And that's part of the technological challenge we might have to face.
Arunaba, and I apologize, I'm probably not pronouncing your name correctly.
Yeah, I don't see an option to rename myself. I go by Arun. It's usually there in Zoom, but maybe this one picks it up. Anyways, yeah, I'll speak because I kind of approached Lucas with this agenda item, and there's been some considerable requests for A lot of it is just coming from COVID and the requirements to quarantine for 10 days. If you are exposed or if you even catch it, you are required to quarantine. And there's a concern that missing 10 days of high school is it's not the easiest thing to do. Options that people I chatted with suggested. One was the recording and everything is like a fly on the wall. You're not aware of it, but it's just there and it's recording everything and streaming it out there. So kind of a best effort situation where the teacher doesn't really react to the recording. They continue teaching the way they are and it's just there. It's recording and streaming it out. And then the second one would be a little bit more involved where you're actually teaching and aware of someone outside, and it happens in universities a fair number of time. It requires more specialized infrastructure. I've taken courses that were recorded, and it was just that they had an overhead projector. They wrote things, and they were just aware of it, although they didn't interact with us live. So I've taken those kinds of courses. So again, it doesn't mean that we have to go for either of these options, but I think definitely online courses are getting more popular, and we can go in a direction that makes sense for this district. The other thing I want to point out is a lot of people have mentioned Los Gatos has already implemented this, the school district. I just don't have the details, so I don't know if Lucas, you had any details of what they've done and how are they handling it, and if there's any feedback you received from them.
I just want to bring a little bit of back focus here. This is the Technology Advisory Committee. We're not the instruction and curriculum, and so it's not within the parameters of us to discuss how a classroom should be run or which methodology should be used in the classroom. And the reality is, many of you have had children or have children in the district. I'm sure you know that every teacher is unique and different. I think our mandate in this would be, if something was adopted, if all of the components came together to create this environment, from a technology standpoint, what would be required? So I don't want us to get into a conversation of should this be happening or not happening or whatever. That there are a lot of other venues where this conversation will be taking place or may not be taking place, but ours really should be from the technology. As Lucas said, what's the level of internet? How many computers are necessary? What would be necessary in a classroom? I mean, as Allison spoke today, I had 8 groups and we did 3 different activities, and then we ended up with individual activities. So what would have been required in my classroom from a technology standpoint if I was teaching that class, and whether it was 10 students at home or if another AP class, say I was teaching 8, that I had 5 students up at Kennedy and 5 up at Mission. How would our committee create a technological environment, if that makes sense, so those students were getting a valuable, vibrant educational experience? What would technology be required? Does that make sense? Vivek.
Actually, you covered some of what I was going to say, Tom. If I look at it, this committee, so Allison's points are very valid, right? Some teachers teach in groups. So students are divided into groups and you're walking around, you're giving them an immersive experience. Some classrooms are done differently. Elementary versus secondary would be different. I just heard of this quote flip method where the teacher records the lessons and distributes videos, and then they are discussing the homework and assignments, right? So the teaching, there's a variety of styles, and every time we have this conversation, we kind of get bogged down as to why this won't work for a particular situation. So I'd like to encourage this team to go solve it for a variety of situations. So you consider 3 or 4 that Lucas mentioned. You consider some of those situations and say, for this situation, this technology will apply. And a tracking camera today is like $200, right? And a good wireless microphone, maybe another $100. So the cost is there, the technology is there. We need to figure out under what conditions this can apply, and some conditions it may not apply at all, right? I mean, teaching somebody painting over video may not be the best, right? So, but theater might work out. Who knows? So we have to see, find some positive paths and see what type of problems can we solve. And eventually, this has to then gel with the CNI committee, and then the board and the bargaining. Everything will have to happen on top of it. But I would like to take a few examples, and perhaps the one that you picked, Alison, is a good one. Is in the situation where you have groups of 4 students doing different type of activities. How are you going to be? How can technology help in broadcasting that? And the answer maybe it's not. And then you go look at the next tile and see if technology solves it or not.
Ellie?
Speaking to the variety of different instructional strategies or configurations for a lesson, I appreciate CTO Bogle's comment that every site is going to have a very specific needs assessment. There hasn't been a district-wide standard in which classrooms are being upgraded across school sites, across wings within a particular campus. And so oftentimes we'll have a teacher implement an awesome strategy making use of a new technology, but then during our next, say, review by the city's fire inspector, we might have a cord that is not in the correct location, or some hazard that is not appropriate to have as a long time solution. So I think it's important to as we're looking at the technology, make sure that that is being paired specific to an individual site or classroom's needs.
Manjeet?
Yes, I wanted to say what Vivek said, and then based on what Lucas mentioned, that we can divide the requirements into some baselines, like 3 baselines, depending on class size or what kind of teaching methods or subjects are taught. And there is always a common denominator where everything will be needed. For example, internet access, video conferencing equipment, and all that. And then there would be some variations of specific that is to a particular class. So we can define 3 baselines depending on the class size. And then based on that, we can build upon saying this is the standard technology. And I just heard Elise mention that it has a lot of things has grown organically, and some teachers have implemented something on their own which works very well for them. If we can adopt that, as well as second thing I want to say is that though we would like to adopt it, we would not like to encourage that because we want some kind of standardization all through the district. So those 2 things, once we have the baseline requirements defined for some 2 or 3 different types, we can easily build on that, and you can, multiply it as many times as you want. It's like a modular structure.
Yeah, Linda?
Yeah, so real quick, we've talked about this a couple times, and it seems each time we talk about it, we always get bogged down in looking at every teacher is going to have to do this. And I think right now we're just looking at, how can we make it viable? But we're not forcing at this point staff and every teacher to teach with cameras. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it just seems we always get, especially staff always kind of gets their ire up because they feel they're being forced to do this. And I don't think at this point we're forcing anybody to do anything.
Well, TAC doesn't have the authority to do that, but parents are asking for this, and it's come up in every MOU discussion with FUDTA. I mean, it is a very real concern that teachers would be asked to do what's called a concurrent model. It is being discussed. It nearly is being included in every MOU. So I don't think it's irresponsible for us to be concerned about, hey, let's explain to people why this would be if right now I had to live stream my lesson tomorrow for my one absent kid, I have a junior with COVID right now. If I were to live stream my lesson for that one absent kid, it would mean an inferior education for the other 34 who are in the classroom. And I think as an educator, it's my responsibility to bring that up.
Okay.
I did raise my hand this time, put myself in the queue here. I think there's a couple I think one of the things that's frustrating for me as a teacher, now I taught at Hopkins for 13 years, and the technology availability there was incredible. We didn't quite have one-to-one, Chromebooks and laptops, but it was pretty close. The PFA up there was supportive, and they had the financial means to do so. And Manjeet brought this up. We do not have a minimum technological standard in the district where every classroom has a minimum standard provided in the classroom. I mean, I'm at Centerville Junior High, and I'm not going to say teachers fight for computers, but rarely we have computer carts. And if you go in after first period, there's rarely a computer cart still in there because we don't even have close to one-to-one Chromebooks. So I'm not going to say I have a fundamental issue with, live streaming or anything like that, but I think that is taking care of a small group of people that already have a high level of technological expertise. When we're at Centerville, we are literally fighting to get computers in the hands and hotspots to students that do not have technology at home, even to do their homework on a Chromebook. So I guess there's that aspect of it. We're looking at providing a service up here when as a district, we haven't provided a minimum level service to all of the students in this district. So I guess there's that part of it. The second part is all of the vehicles of levels of instruction that we could talk about. We could spend days talking about the different types of live streaming that should be made available. And I guess that's my concern. As Lucas said, his team, they could put together the package for us tomorrow if they know the parameters. The question is, how many parameters do we want to ask of his department to provide without being given guidance as to what that instructional environment looks like? And I don't think it's our job to provide that information to Lucas at this point. I think it's not a technology issue, it's an instructional issue. What is the level of video streaming that we would want to provide to the technology to the teachers, the training to the teachers, and what the students are doing? Are they at home? Are they at another school? So I think there's so many variables, it's difficult for us to make a recommendation to Lucas's department to provide the three initials are missing me here, an RF, whatever it is, RFP. When we don't, there it is, when we don't have a set that we could write down and hand to Lucas and he say, okay, people, go out and find bids to provide these and these 5 levels of classroom. That's my fear, is that we're saying do live video classroom streaming, and on Allison's point, yeah, teachers are fearful, and I consider myself very tech savvy, but I've never been trained. I've been at the other end. I mean, I got my teaching credential online, and in 2 years I never spoke to a professor once. But that's not what we want to be providing our students. So yeah, online instruction is great, except that in many cases it's not live streaming. So my feeling is that we need to be able to provide Lucas's department with some parameters, and I don't necessarily feel that is our scope of our job, our committee's responsibility. Lucas?
So I hear, obviously, there's a lot of ideas here, and I appreciate what you're saying, Tom. I did mention that in IT, we did basically develop three potential scopes of work for 3 different classroom types. We could I could have my team put that together and share some general ideas for another meeting, just so you could see what those 3 potential models would look like. In the grand scheme of things, some of that information would probably be relevant if we were given direction to implement a solution for teaching. But it might look different than that as well, depending upon the classroom and some of those other factors. So at this time, I think that's really the most that the IT department could offer at this point, is just say, here's 3 possible scenarios and for the TAC to review. And I don't know if people are amenable to that, and I know we're getting down there. I'll keep my update really short tonight, by the way.
Okay. Yeah, I did want to say that we're at, my computer says 8:28. We do have a few people in the queue. One person in the queue here. And if we could end with one person, and then if we could then go with Lucas's update, and I'm more than willing to put this on next month's agenda, that we could talk, and then maybe give Lucas's department further guidance if we have any expectations of that. Vivek?
Yeah, so just addressing a couple of points that were mentioned here, right? So I don't think any of us have a perfect idea of what needs to be done. And we need to experiment. We need to go figure out exactly what could work, would work, right? So, so as we solve this, it will have to be an iterative process. And Lucas, your proposals, I think it should be shared with this committee as well as with CNI, so that CNI can say, hey, with this type of setup, these type of instruction models can be supported, right? And then the discussion with teachers group can happen. Who can adopt it? Who wants to be an early pilot? And then obviously the whole bargaining process will have to be done around it. But given that there are so many layers, we don't want to get stuck on technology. So it's great that you are saying, I have 3 models, and let's see what fits around it. And then let's go to the next level. And we'll probably come back to you again in a few months to go figure some other things out along with it. So yeah, let's put this on the agenda again for next time. I think this is a good discussion that we are having here.
Okay. Lucas, you're up.
All right. Well, real briefly, let's see. I do want to share that we, at the last meeting, I believe I mentioned we were going to be updating some additional information for Infinite Campus. We have provided additional tutoring documents out there, FAQs, and one of the recommendations was to provide small segments of training as well. We haven't gotten to that point, but that is probably our next step, which I do think that really makes a lot of sense. So, you know, if a parent goes on and they want to just know how to do a very specific thing, or a student comes on and they just want to see, how do I print my official transcript? There would be a quick snippet for them for doing. So that's something that Bart has been working with me on, and I appreciate that. The other thing I mentioned, and I also, a communication went out about this, our push notifications are now live. So for families or students who use the app, when you go on, I believe the first time you go on, it will prompt you and say, do you want to enable notifications? So unless a parent has actually gone in and turned off their notifications through the parent portal, it will prompt you to do that. And those push notifications are for attendance, assignments, and when grades are updated. And it does give options on a couple of them to scale it. So if you truly wanted to get a notification every time an assignment was scored, you could, or you could choose to get a notification of, say, notify me if my student score is less than 70%. So there's a sliding scale for that, and also for grades. And finally, I wanted to give you a quick update. I mentioned previously that the district / IT department has gone through a process to apply for emergency connectivity funding. We are still in the process of waiting for the USAC, or the URATE program, to provide us the final determination. We've had 2 requests for information, which we have now provided to them. It's pretty basic stuff. But anytime E-rate is involved, there's no guarantees that you're going to get funding. And so the good thing is the funding was not depleted of this, I think it was $7.1 billion. There was still a small amount left. So assuming the application looks good and they are okay with our justification, we should receive our funding. But they are pretty significantly behind in responding to schools. I think they were supposed to have all of the determinations done like a month ago, but again, sometimes USAC can take a very long time to make decisions, but it is really the only federal agency to do this.
Lucas,
That's
what
my
is
update.
the agency again? I'm sorry.
Oh, USAC. All right.
Okay. Let's see here. Oh, Arunabi, you have a question, Bob?
Oh yeah, I have. So Lucas, thanks for that little sidebar discussion you had with me last week. So one of the things is I did some research on Schoology and Canvas. Those are the two pieces of software you had briefly mentioned to me. I found out that Cupertino actually used Schoology. I think San Ramon also uses Schoology, and then use a mix of Google Classroom and Schoology. So, I mean, after this whole Infinite Campus thing has boiled down, and we can get a sense of what our experience is with Infinite Campus and whether going with one of these other software pieces even makes any sense. Maybe 2 meetings from now, that is something we can look at as an agenda item.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Don? Don, your hand was up? No?
Are we, Lucas, are you done with your update? Are we going on to future agenda items or are we not there yet?
That was my update. I'm done.
Okay. I just,
Okay.
So if we're talking about future agenda items, I know that we already talked about the live streaming coming back. But I really want to piggyback on a really important point that Tom made in terms of focusing on equity across the district in terms of technology. Because, you know, I just think it's super important to think about that first and foremost in our priorities for technology. And like you said, how many kids out there can't even do their homework? And our focus is going to be about live streaming classes for a variety of different reasons, not necessarily just COVID. So I much appreciated your comment, Tom, of what you brought up there. And I think that that's something we certainly need to continue and discuss in more detail.
Ann?
A future agenda item that the classified school employees would like to hear about is about, Dawn, thank you, equity of access to outdoor speakers, outdoor bells that automatically ring, and where we are tying in our VoIP in the transportation yard and at facilities, ops, and grounds. There's a variety of information floating around about who has what's working, who's having to jump up and manually ring bells. So we need to have some data and some timelines and costs and things like that to improve classified staff safety as well as student safety.
Okay. Yeah, and I guess it's a tag on in terms of equity. We've looked at this numerous times over the last few years, and we've never fully addressed it. The idea of what is the minimum level that every classroom should have in terms of technology. Now we have at this point, every teacher gets a computer the minute they're hired and we've done the replacements, so we're on a refreshment schedule. But still, even in our school, my classroom is a little bit more tech set up than the 2 classrooms next to me. And that's because I for whatever reason, feel the need to have more technology, and I want it to be seamless. But if that's our standard, that should be our standard. So I think that the equity is concurrent with the classroom equity as well, providing that level for all students. Lucas?
Yeah, thanks, Ann, for that, your comments there. I think, one of our roles, again, as a technology advisory committee is to do exactly that, to advise the board. So if as a committee, we want to discuss the idea of one-to-one programming, that is certainly something we could talk about. And we can bring that to the board as a recommendation. Now, clearly, I think most people in the district support that. And obviously, it's a financial question, right? So that's something that we could do as a future conversation, no question about it, for the committee. I do want to take just a moment to address, there are some schools that do have certain missing pieces right now. And we can talk about this as a future agenda item as well, but I just want to make sure that it's clear that that is recognized and that there was a project that is supposed to have occurred to address those IT scope gaps. So when there was the huge IT upgrade project that occurred over multiple years, as part of that project, certain pieces were missed along the way at each site. And our company, Vanner, put together a scope gap project and we did this back in 2019 with them to address, hey, a speaker's missing here, this is missing here, this is missing here. I wanted people to hear that tonight. It's not that the IT department, for example, is not aware of those things. When we get tickets, people saying, well, why isn't this done? I look at the scope gap project, which has many hundreds of things on it. And I'm like, there it is. It's on the scope gap project that needs to be taken care of. So it's really outside of the ability of IT to do that. We just don't have the resources to take on literally hundreds of projects. We can't do it. And there's a reason it's on that scope gap list.
Don?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that on my comment. I realize that the one-to-one technology is a big ask. But I think, maybe more along the lines of just that, what is that foundational expectation that should be district-wide? And I think that's a really important conversation to have. So, I mean, one-to-one technology, of course, would be fantastic, but when we're talking about financial limitations, we can at least talk about those, foundational expectations district-wide. And I think that we get lost sometimes hearing from a few people who want like the really big, great things, and we lose sight of all the people we're not hearing from who really need the basic things. And I think it's our responsibility to think about taking care of everyone's basic needs before our focus becomes a small group of their extra needs.
I did have one question. Can I ask? If there is a disparity in tech across schools, is it because some schools are not funded at the same level as other schools? Or is it because some schools just get more funding organically through their parent groups or whatever?
There's a lot of reasons. And we could spend that is a rabbit hole that we could spend an entire day talking about why different schools. It has to do with the level of PFA funding. It has and that has a huge part of it coming from Hopkins to Centerville, the economic wherewithal. But yes, it has a lot of factors. The funding from the district is generally generally, it's not always, but generally the same across the district. But economics of individual schools is different based on various factors. Robert, you had your hand up?
Yeah, so kind of maybe we should think about, we used to do presentations every year to the board, and we've kind of done it on an ad hoc basis, but that's one way to present a unified message to the board. So perhaps we want to consider doing one at the end of this year. And Tom, maybe you could present it, and maybe we could collect some of these ideas.
Yeah, we're scheduled at it. Lucas and I actually had a conversation about that this week. So. Okay, hopefully everything was captured. And then on the next agenda we have, we'll have our affirmation for Mr. Payne's presentation for the following month as well. Okay, anything else before we adjourn? Nope. Everybody have a great evening, and I will see everybody next month.
Thanks, everyone.